So yeah, a quick what do you call refresh of what we have seen last time. I'll not take much of your time. I'll just quickly go through what we have learned, what we have discussed earlier. So in the part one, the last time we just discussed on the identity management and the problems it is trying to solve, the CIA tried, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, what they and how does the access controls are defined with to solve these to solve the problems and also to prevent the loss that happened to the CIA trial and different types of access controls, preventive, detective, and corrective. And coming to what is identity management and what exactly is identity. So what is the difference between identification and verification, authentication, authorization, accountability? And we have also seen differences between database, LDAP, and AD, and how a typical enterprise applications will look like when a user has multiple roles and trying to access different applications within the enterprise. So with the different credentials. So earlier, way back in my before to 1999 or so, people used to access applications with the different credentials. So they used to you would have find the typical old banking system. So the earlier when you used to go to bank for any transaction, you'd find people writing down their credentials and putting that paper under the monitor. So this is how they used to remember, because there are multiple applications the bank has to access to. So for each of them, they have different credentials. So this is one problem that the identity and access management will try to solve. And we have seen the different types of credentials and credential management systems, how they are used in multi-factor authentication and to protect any application. So these are the some of the multi-factor authentications that we know can be commercially used. Apart from these, there are other factors or not, other types of credentials which are used for authentication these days. But basically, there are three categories: what you know, what you have, and what you are. These are the only three factors that broadly categorized, and the combination of any of these three will become a multi-factor authentication. So it can be a combination of what you have and what you know, and what you are and what you know, something like that. And then we have quickly jumped on to session management, how session management will help. We have seen how one single session will actually span different sessions, a web session, a logical session, in fact, which is actually giving you the access to different applications, and a desktop session that you are trying to log into multiple systems or workstations, and the physical session that you are passing through the doors that you are across within the enterprise. We have seen the IAM service component. So what systems are called as IAM? I mean, what does the IAM to be called a system to be called at IAM? What's a component, service component that it should comply to? So basically, it should have authentication services, it should have user management services, it should have directory services, it should have authorization services. Way back to the before the cloud environment, it is always like authentication system, user management platform, or directory platform, or authorization module or something component. But with the cloud coming in, and more governance frameworks and reporting and analytics that have been that are running over the data that's been accumulated within the enterprise, the newer IAM, the new generation of IAM should be having, or it is expected to have, authentication services, user management service, directory services, and authorization services. And each of these services can be independently deployed, managed, integrated, and used. So that's the beauty of new identity and access management systems. So the identity and access management typically was identity management, access management, you have single sign-on as part of it. And then after some days, people thought, okay, why not access management act independently, and you have single sign-on products that are available independent to identity management, access management. So for access identity management, you can still go with Okta or Ping, or other identity management that you have. For access management, you can go with Big IP or CA, SiteMinder, or there are a few other access management products like Tivoli. And for single sign-on, again, there are multi-factor authentications like Okta. You have Dio, many other products that have come into the market in the recent times. So all these, integrations and connections that have become more important now, because each one is having their own importance, and they can independently work. And each module, or the identity manager, access management product itself has got a big roadmap down the line, how the access management will be like after 10 years or 15 years. The consultants like Gartner and Forsters, they've already defined a 20-year roadmap for each of the independent components that you see on this board. So again, access management is again divided into the privilege identity management and privilege access management, single sign-on. You have multi-factor authentication. So these days you see multi-factor authentication platforms independently, like they can get integrated with CA SiteMinder, with PAM and PIM modules from Entrust, or access management can be any other product like Big IP, and identity management can still be can be Ping identity management or Oracle identity management. So yeah, that's how the independent components have been growing up. So this is a typical enterprise network. So it has service provider, it has identity provider. So with this in place, you can this is typically access manager. So this will depict us with one single user with the same set of applications that have been used earlier. Now a user is able to log in with one set of credentials rather than remembering all different credentials in the different applications. So this service provider and identity provider have actually reduced the overhead of managing different identities across the applications. It's just not managing the identities. Some people might feel that managing identities is just the username and password. No, each application, based on its severity, criticality, and the sensitive information that it carries and stores, it is that it will have a different set of policies across identities. Like passwords need to be changed. One application says that you need to have a different set of password. The other applications gives a different schema for the password. The third applications has a different scheme, like the policy says that the password should be changed every 1 month or 6 months. So it's not like one set fits for all. So each application has got their own boundaries, limiting the identities or mapping the identities to the role, or it does a granular level of access management also. So that is the reason why you still need to have identities for the applications, and the application, that way the applications can define their own access management, like what menus should be displayed, what content should be displayed, what should be hidden from which role of the user, sort of things. So coming to single sign-on, you would have seen now that with one single identity, you are able to access multiple applications, even though they are in a different networks. Like one application can be in a cloud, and the other one can be in an on-prem, and some applications can be within the desktop. So yeah, again, SSL single sign-on. Last time we didn't discuss about the desktop SSO or web SSO, or there are multiple types of SSOs defined earlier, but they are no more valid for now. But the desktop logins usually, or the applications through which the SSO is happening when they are installed as part of a desktop, they are usually considered as desktop SSO or enterprise SSO. So like you have applications like Communicator, or the old applications, Link used to work that way. So once you log into a system and you switch on your Link, it gets connected to a Active Directory, and it knows that it is you, and you are trying to access from the same machine, and it will not ask for the credentials again. It will just log in. But that failed over the time. It has its own set of problems that couldn't solve. And desktop SSO is handled in a different way that we'll discuss down the line. The other SSO that was very popular was the web SSO. That is only for the web applications. But the modern applications are way beyond only being web. So the only HTTP based applications giving an SSO or providing SSO over HTTP was becoming more difficult. There are applications which don't run on HTTP typically. So the enterprises has to switch or look for other alternatives or other solutions. So we'll discuss down the line what are the other options for the SSO. And then we quickly jumped into federated identity management. So wherein the identity management or identities are spread across multiple directory services or storage services. So these are as different applications resources support different authentication mechanisms or single sign-ons or the storage of the credentials and authentication authorization that is done. So all these things are different from each of the applications, and they handle some of the applications. They have a different technology factor also. Some applications are developed in PHP, some applications are developed in ASP.NET, some applications are developed in using Java. So because of the technology stack also, there is a easy tendency for the developers, or the stack allows you to have a tight binding with the directory services that are available. So with that in mind, so applications have moved to their own identity provider, so where they want to store and manage the identities. So the federated identity management is now it is just amalgamation or consolidation of all the identities across different directory services, or in fact the domains itself. So how do they consolidate is by trusting each other. So you have one directory server, Azure AD, we have Facebook as identity provider, or Google or ADFS. So once you establish this trust between one directory service with the another directory server, so they can exchange the identity information, around the attributes for the identity. It's like the attributes like date of birth, place of birth, or your last login, or your place of login, your IP address, and your system signature through which you are trying to log in. So there are a lot of many attributes that goes around, like like I said, your location, your address, your mobile number. So all this information, either as a claims or at different technologies use different terminology. Usually they are claims or they are attributes. So they are mapped to each of the identities. So in Azure, you would have put your user ID as something else like ABC123, and your place of birth, or your address, or your location, your mobile number. You have put all these attributes around that identity in Azure AD. And coming to any other directory service, for example ADFS, you would have defined your own identity, like you're being the same person but a different user ID. Instead of ABC123 in Azure AD, you would have given XYZ123 here. But it is the same user, right? It is the same user who is trying to having two identities across the directory services. So there should be a way to link these two. So that is actually done at a much higher level through a trust between these two parties through identity management platform. So identity federation is nothing but supporting multiple identity systems across the applications, and then it will try to trust the devices also. Like you have a tablet, and you have a desktop, you have a laptop, and you have a mobile. So you are given the modern applications, the modern enterprise applications are given a flexibility to access the applications from any of these form factors. Sometimes you wanted to access your mail through mobile app, or you wanted to access the same mail to a desktop app. So it's the same identity, but trying to access the mail system within an enterprise, but different form factors. So somebody needs to consolidate and authorize, or help you to access the same content across different form factors. So that is where these identity platforms will help you out. It is not the solution, but it will help you to map the identities that are spread across multiple directories for the same user. Though it doesn't provide you the access, but it will be able to consolidate the identities that you have, that for a single user has across multiple identity providers. So I think now it is clear about the federation. So you should be thinking about now, why SSO if you have identity federation in place. So is there any difference between these two? So SSO is all about providing the access, after the authentication is done. But the federation identity management is all about consolidation of the identities itself. It doesn't provide any access actually. It doesn't share the access when you actually log into one application. It doesn't provide any mechanism for you to log into the other application using the same credentials. Instead it gives you extra flexibility to have different credentials altogether in a different domain. So as the same user, you will have multiple set of credentials across different applications. So single sign-on must actually internally store the credentials, and then initial authentication, once you're successfully authenticated with one application, it has to share the session with other applications, so that you need not present the credentials again. But in federated identity management, it's all about two domains which are getting federated. User can just can have a different set of credentials in different applications. It's just a consolidation of or mapping of one user ID to multiple user IDs in different applications. Finally, just because an organization can be a member of different federations, like one application can have an ADFS account, it can have a GCP account, or the enterprise can be a part of AWS. So it is running some applications in AWS, some applications in GCP, some applications in Azure AD or Azure. It doesn't mean that the policies should actually reflect across all the different clouds, because each cloud and each set of applications that are running into each of the applications, each of the service provider, are different. The applications that are developed in Azure platform or mostly the technology stack they use are ASP.NET or C#.NET, and AWS you can deploy in fact any stack, but Java based applications can be deployed there, for example. So the one policy defined in GCP will not actually reflect or get enforced in the same way as the application got deployed in AWS or any other cloud platform. So what the organization has to do is they define that the rules for each of these cloud platforms differently. But with the Terraforms and the new cross platforms providers or the technologies that are available now, you are able to provide or define a policy which gets translated into native platforms. Like you define a policy in federated identity management, then federated identity management will take care of reflecting the same policy in GCP and Azure and AWS, for you not to go to individual service providers and create the policy again. So the new technologies have emerged, and they're offering more economic ways of for creating the new policies which can be enforced, reflected in multiple service platforms or service providers platforms. So that is a basic difference between SSO and FIM. Coming to authorization mechanisms, So there are multiple, now that you understood what is identity management and how identities are stored when they are spread across multiple distributed systems within an organization. So organization itself having say 20 plus applications, it has a flexibility to deploy 10 in either AWS, 10 in 5 in GCP, and another 5 in another service provider. But the authorization mechanisms for a user, for the users of the enterprise, should be somewhere defined in a way that that should be common to all these platforms. So there are multiple models within the access controls through which you are able to define the access for a single user or users in the enterprise. So basically, or broadly, these access controls are categorized into discretionary access control and non-discretionary access controls. Discretionary are they are not very old, but yeah, they are used for very straightforward platforms like firewalls and other stuff. But non-discretionary are more about adding more attributes and policies which can take a binary decision based on some of the attributes that are mapped to the identities. So this difference is discretionary, non-discretionary, and within non-discretionary you will have role-based access control, rule-based access control, attribute-based access control, and mandatory access control. So these are categorized based on how the controls are managed. The controls are managed through roles of the user in the organization, or the controls are managed through rules that if this happens, then do this based this set of rules, or it is attribute-based access control. So are there any other attributes that are part of the policy? So based on how the controls are managed, these are categorized. So admins usually what they do is they administer the non-discretionary access controls and then make changes that affect the entire environment or the system. Whereas the non-discretionary access controls does not focus on much of an identity. Here, as you could see, role-based is not based on identity. It is based on a role. So if you are playing a role of a manager in the system, and if you are trying to access application 2, then it should be allowed or not allowed. And other policy might say that if we are being a role, if you are being a part of a group or playing a role of a software engineer, then you should be allowed to access per4 system. So these type of rules are usually written or developed or are defined using the role, not by the identity. So that is where the non-discretionary access control comes into picture. So we'll dig down a little bit and see what each one will talk about. And this discretionary access control now is like your file system. Like you provide a chmod 777, you give permissions to each of the object. So every object has an owner, or the owner in the security domain usually called as custodian, one who takes the custodianship of an object or a process. So there's a data custodian for that object. So every object can be defined by somebody as a template. So when I create an object of that type, then that owner of that object or the data is me. So I can provide access to that data or to that object to others based on my discretion. I can define, like I can provide access to one user and not provide access to other. So it is solely the owner of the object who will define the access policy. It's not the admin. It is the object owner who defines it. So usually, not usually, all the modern file system use this DAC. So as the owner, the user can modify the permissions to grant or deny, or to give you limited access, read access, only write access, to download or whatever. So based on the the user's discretion, it is at the user's or the owner's discretion that the access is made. So that is where it is called. That is why it is called as discretionary access control. Yeah, this is usually defined through ACLs on objects. So one object can have multiple ACLs, and ACLs will define. And yeah, these are pretty straightforward stuff. If an object is created by me, then it can, the policy can be like Santosh should be given access as a read only, or somebody else like Anil should be given access as write only or read and write, something like that. Coming to role-based access control, one of the first non-discretionary access controls, it is one of the most popular, and it has been living with us for quite some time. And all the modern access controls, the methodologies and on the access controls are more or less dependent on role-based access control. So these systems actually are deployed to make decisions based on the role of the user. But you see the directories like Active Directory and Lab, they don't have something called role for a user. Rather, they depend on something called groups. So it is like once a user is added to a certain group, like programmer. So user will become a programmer, and once a user is added to admins group, then user will become admin. Once a user is added to a managers group, user will become admin, sorry, manager. So one user within the same organization enterprise can have multiple roles, and this has been the practice for quite some time. And modern applications, to meet the latest access policies, or to define the new policies around the roles. So this system has helped a lot, and it has been in practice for quite some time. So define the rules based on the roles of the user. So currently in this practice, you will get a doubt like, what if a particular user, one rule suggests you not to access, to deny the access, and other rule will say that you should be given an access. Same user, I myself part of F5. So if I have two systems, one doesn't or one denies my access, or I don't have access or authorized access to one system of being in one role. The other role, as a PO, I have access to one set of system or one set of systems. So when I try to access any of these two applications, so these two rules will be triggered, where one rule will actually will tell you that you should be denied the access. The other rule tells you that you should be given access to. So there are multiple ways of handling this collision. This is a typical problem in any airbag systems. You'll find it in any access management that you know. So usually what flexibility the older systems gives you is to define your own policy. Like in the policies, if in the chain, if one policy says you deny, you can deny everything else. So deny will take the privilege. Or you can define a policy such that if one policy gives you access to, we can give an access to the access to that object or to an application. So that way, role-based access control has its own complications and own set of problems and challenges in implementation. But over the time, people have solved that through multiple systems or multiple processes that are in place, especially the mutual collision or mutual collision of the policies itself. And at last, RBAC will help to enforce the principle of least privilege by preventing the privilege creep. So that we have just discussed. If one policy says that we should be uh, denied the access, then if all the other policies says allow, it will be denied. Your access to that particular application will be denied. So that's about role-based access control. And coming to the next one is rule-based access control. So in this model, this uses a set of rules or configurations, restrictions, filters, whether what can or cannot occur on a system, whether it should be denied or accessed or allowed. So this model, rule-based access control, is mostly like so global rules that apply to all the objects within the system. Usually, rule-based access controls are followed by firewalls. So firewalls are straightforward. They tell you this port is open for this IP address, internal, external, this IP address for this port, and this type of content. You can the firewall opens up and it will allow the packet getting inside. Otherwise, it will drop. So if the packet coming into the firewall is not meeting any of the criteria to be allowed, otherwise the packet will be dropped. So these rule-based access controls are usually followed by the firewalls. Firewalls are usually again hardware-based firewalls, you have software-defined firewalls. These days you even have web application firewalls, WAF. The third one in the non-discretionary is the attribute-based access control. Attribute-based access control, they use policies that are actually defined for multiple attributes or the rules. So there are many software-defined network applications that use attribute-based access control. So attribute is like you have date of birth as one of the attribute for the identity. So you can define a policy saying that if the date of birth is greater than 1980, you allow, or if the age of the identity is more than of the user is more than 18 years, you allow this content. Otherwise, you don't allow the content. So this type of policies are defined around the attributes, not an identity. It just says that the DOB, the date of birth, is an attribute to an identity. So based on that attribute, you can define the policy, whether that should be allowed or denied. And the last one is the MAC, mandatory access control. So this is majorly defines or depends on the labels, classification of the labels. So these labels, I mean, how they are different from the attributes are, labels can be not just on the identities. So labels can be on the objects, on the content of the data. So when you have a broader classification of the data that you store within the realm or within the same domain, then you place some labels to the system. It is like sensitive, confidential, classified, like that. So you create a compartment of or categorization of the data. So once you are trying to access that, you can define a policy saying that anybody with this role should not or should can be allowed to use any data in this compartment or in this category. So it is just like a role based, but it is not really on the identity. It is on the labels on the data also. Role based only defines whether you are allowed to that system or not. But within the system, the MAC gives you a flexibility to categorize the data itself. Whereas RBAC and rule based, they don't do anything on the data. They only do on the user or identity part of it. Whereas the access control or the MAC will give you a flexibility to categorize the data. If the data is of type classified or secret, then only certain roles, only identity with certain rules are allowed to, either edit or certain rules to read it. Not everybody can in that role can come and start using it. So that's about the mandatory access control. So coming to the one of the last or interesting classification, this is ZTNA is not a access control model. It is a approach, or it is a model through which you can define, or define the access to a particular system. In the all the non-discretionary and discretion, you would have seen that they are, though even the non-discretionary also, they are very discrete in nature, because you are able to define a policy around an attribute that you already know. But what if I have to create a policy, or allow or deny based on a dynamic attribute which I don't know? The decision has to be done or taken at that point in time. So there is no policy. I mean, there's no policy through which you can go to, remove take out the book and see whether this role, this user coming from this IP and accessing this application at this point in time from this IP address, from this time zone is allowed. I mean, is allowed or not. So instead of traversing all these policies, which is actually a very cumbersome and complicated process, just like a VPN, it is pretty slow and they are not dynamic in nature. Whereas zero trust access control is a more modernized way of least privilege access control, and it does many more things than the least privilege. Just not prevent the creep of the privilege, identity privilege, but it does more than that. But it is not a single system. It is not just an enforcement agent. It is not a policy store. It is built on top of RBAC, on top of rule-based access control, on top of mandatory access control, on top of discretionary or other more access controls. So we'll see what it is now. Zero trust is, as I told you, is built on top of principle of least privilege, and it is actually coined by Forrester Research in 2010, and they have been publishing and marketing this model into enterprises from last decade. So it's pretty new than the other access controls, but it is itself is not categorized into one of the access controls. So all the access controls models that you have learned or seen in just some time ago could be part of, or could be or part of ZTNA itself. So ZTNA does more than what the role-based or rule-based or MAC does. So it is all about providing a access control with the concept of least privilege. So it is like, even if one of the policies says that you should be denied, you will be denied if whatever policy says to allow you or gives access to you to the data. So it does in a manner that makes some assumptions of the trust actually. So in the past architectures, you need to trust actually. You need to say that, okay, this is based on this assumption, and assumption saying that assumption of a trust. Once you are trusted by one of the system in the network, in the enterprise, then all other systems will also try to trust you. So the chain of trust actually is one of the biggest threat to the enterprise. So what happens in a typical access control is, if one application is started trusting you, will share the same session with other applications, and trust that the application one has already done the authentication, authorization, and others and other due diligence, and then it will carry that trust to the other applications for which you might not have access at all or should not have access at all. So the core operating principle of ZTNA that is that no user or no device through which the user is trying to access ever be granted access or given resources based on only on one condition, that is network. So there are other factors which will govern the access of a user to that application. So we'll quickly see down the line what are the different types of ZTNA, not types of ZTNA, types of access controls that can be in place within an organization. So zero trust is a security concept centered on the belief that organizations should not automatically trust anything inside or outside its parameters. So this statement is very important, and it should be very clear to you. We being working on some part of ZTNA in the APM, and instead of carrying that trust, automatical trust, so you should actually verify it continuously and authenticate the user when and where required. ZTNA is strictly identity verification process. It does, modern ZTNA does more than that now, but it is that you have to verify, the system verifies your identity every now and then, even when you have already access to one system in the whole enterprise, and the enterprise there is SSO already in place, still it will try to verify your authentication at regular intervals. There are three components in ZTNA: user or application, device authentication, and more importantly, trust. The trust between applications, trust between the user identity and the device ID. So ZTNA, when you place it in the middle, you have data, you have applications, infrastructure, and other networks, and you have devices and endpoints and identities in the other side. And identity is getting authenticated through multi-factor and user as a shared session through which the policies are enforced and validated, and some threat intelligence framework will continuously monitor, and at real time the policy is evaluated. If anybody remembers old access management systems, I'll tell you a classic example. If I have two different roles in an organization, typically at FI, I should be having any not more than 4 to 5 roles. I being as a programmer in or end user in one of the application, and some other applications like Jira, I might have been provisioned, my identity have been provisioned as PO, a role PO, and some other applications as a different role. So what happens is, if I'm trying to access one of the application, so one rule might say that anybody with this role should not be allowed, or anybody with this role should be allowed. For the same application or the same identity, there are two policies. One says allow, one says deny. And how do you solve it? So these type of real time to solve the real time complexities, the typical old access manager used to resolve it once during the startup, and keep the end result. It says that it's something like one policy says allow, one other policy says deny. It will remember that allow or deny based on the policies that you have created, and every time or the next time when the user is trying to access with the same set of roles, then it knows the result. It need not go through fetch the policies, check for denial and allow, and try to resolve every time that the user is trying to access the application. Rather, it maintains a cache or resolved state, uh, and then at the runtime it only takes the result. So there are been some pros and cons of this system, of this approach, and whenever there is a change in the policy, it will not get affected so easily. you have to restart all parts of the system, and then this policy is carried over, and then at some point in time the system remembers it to allow or deny. So it's a huge what do you call overhead for the administrators, and also a lot of confusion and chaos that is created whenever there is a change in the policy. Whereas the ZTNA, the policy is evaluated at runtime. It is the same access manager that is being used. It's not that ZTNA has a different access manager or a different identity manager. The same identity manager, same access manager, same role-based access controls, but only thing is how do you configure it. The way you configure it will make the difference. I'll tell you how the what do you call endpoint initiated or service initiated ZTNA will happen. So one other doubt that I got when I was actually reading initially about the ZTNA a year ago, or when I joined FI. So I was pretty confused, like when the VPN is already in place, which actually takes care of all the authentication, device authentication, and the user identity authentication, and then it will allow you to make a connection, a dedicated tunnel to the enterprise network, and you can access whatever you have been granted to within the enterprise. But whereas ZTNA, when I was just confused with the VPN versus the ZTNA, so that's how I wanted to. Maybe some of you would also get the same doubt, so I put some content over here to clear the confusion. So even if a user has been permitted to access one part of the network, one area of the network, or one application in the system, the ZTNA doesn't assume the user is trusted, whereas VPN does this type of things. I mean, if you are trusted in one application, or if you make a successful VPN tunnel with the enterprise network, all the traffic that is coming into the tunnel, VPN blindly believes the trust, and it will pass that content back and forth. Whereas ZTNA, though you have already access to one application, you are successfully authenticated, authorized, still it doesn't believe you when you're trying to access another application. It does the same due diligence as it does when you are trying to access the first application. But though it will not ask you to present the credentials again, but ZTNA in the background, it does all these steps for you. Without your knowledge, it goes back to the server, say this user Vinay, though he has already authenticated to one system, Jira Align, he is now trying to access Federate or ServiceNow application. He should be allowed or not. So that type of checking, though you already have a trusted authentication or secure tunnel with the enterprise, ZTNA will not allow you. So ZTNA is to implement a comprehensive this concept actually. So to implement the ZTNA at a more high level, or at a scale, at the enterprise scale, where the environments are distributed in multiple networks. So network admins need to control who can access which application from wherever they're accessing. They are accessing from house or within the network or outside the network, and accessing what type of applications. So this least privilege approach requires a lot of access controls. The access controls should be spanned across all the distributed environments. So this access control should be defined in devices, endpoints, cloud environment, SaaS, and user endpoints, infrastructure, and all the infrastructure that is actually protected. So it is little cumbersome for the administrators. They have to go to each environment, define the policies, carry the policies to one network to the other network. So critical resources and applications actually they are spread across data centers, distributed data centers and branches for offices and hybrid cloud environments, multi-cloud environments. So VPNs are not ready, were not designed in that way. Say you have two applications, same Jira line is implemented in two different regions. So you have made a one VPN tunnel with one of the cloud environment in one region, and you're trying to access the application, Jira line. And suddenly this Jira line goes down for some reason, and network is down. So the other instance of Jira line is in another region. Though the cloud environments will give you the flexibility to connect to the other application in case of fallback or disaster, but the VPN will not allow you, because VPN is still is binded to only that particular region one environment or network. So what you have to do is you have to disconnect this VPN, make a connection with the second environment, and establish the VPN and the secure tunnel. Then you can start sending the information or fetch the information from the system. So VPN is not designed to handle fallbacks, failovers in case of when the system is down. Though there are then the split tunneling and there are new concepts in the VPN which are allowing to some extent. It is making the lives end users life a little bit better, but not to extent that it has to. So there are two offerings in ZTNA, just like in IDP you have SP initiated authentication and IDP initiated authentication in the case of federation. So ZTNA also had endpoint initiated and service initiated. So endpoint initiated is like end user will actually try to access one of the application here. So first he'll go to the ZTNA controller, or it can be a typical access manager in just a access manager, that's it. In this case, the access manager will go to the identity server or directory, authenticate you with whatever multi-factor authentication or single factor authentication or just username password, and then make a valid session with you. It will also inform the gateway. A gateway can be a reverse proxy, or it can be a web gateway, or it can be an enforcement agent in this case. So controller will share that session, tell that some end user Vinay is trying to access this application, and from this device, and its MAC IDs or device signature is this. The gateway will have the information, and once he comes back to the gateway, then it will validate with the ZTNA, and then it will give you, based on the the end policy, whether you should be allowed or granted, it will give you access to the application. But one problem with that end user is end user initiated or endpoint initiated ZTNA is like it is dependent on end user, and there should be an agent running over here. So these offerings are more closely follow the original software defined parameter stuff specification. So you need a agent that is installed on the authorized end user devices, sends information and some security context from where he is trying to log in, what is his external IP address, what's his MAC address, and few other attributes. So this controller prompts the user to on the device for authentication and returns. Once you have been authenticated successfully, it will tell you, hey man, you can access the following applications, just like your federate.fi.com. Once you log into federate.fi.com, you will see full list of applications that you are allowed to access to. So that way this helps, but only thing is you should be having a agent on the end user device. So device has some endpoint, just like MDM agent or endpoint agent or a VPN agent. So you have a FI access sort of agent that is running at the end user device. Enterprises might not like, or it is very difficult to make everybody comply and install this agent on all the devices the user is owning. With the concept of bring your own device, it has become much more complicated. So that is the reason why we have another ZTNA, that is service initiated, where the end user device through which you are trying to log in will actually approach the broker. So when you're trying to access the application might just go to a connector might redirect the user to a proxy, where the proxy will connect to the identity server and then authenticate the user and redirect the user back to the application. So this offering, when compared to the other, is actually has come up from a concept called Beyond Corporate. Google's sort of ZTNA, but you can search for it. Beyond Corp is a bit similar to the service initiated ZTNA. So a connector in the last approach, you had an agent running in the end device, but in this approach, there is no agent. You are trying to access the application, you are getting redirected to a broker and then to the connector. The connector will authenticate broker will authenticate, do all the due diligence, and then redirect you back to the application. So a connector there's no end user agent that is running on the device. So this connector will take care of all the establishing the what you call session and outbound connection, and all the authentication due diligence is all done at the connector level, which is at the server side. So this is called inside out way of approach to the cloud. Users authenticate to the provider, I mean the identity provider here, to access the protected applications. This is the application that is being protected. In turn, the provider, the provider itself will validate the user within the directory that the user ID is stored, and only after the validation is successful, the traffic will pass through the cloud or provider's network, which isolates from the applications from directly accessing via proxy. So enterprise firewalls, the firewall at F5 now need not, they don't require to open a port for the inbound traffic. So all that is done through a connector inside the network, so that all these applications are hidden. Actually, they are not shown to the outside world until and unless you log into federatefi.com. You'll never be able to access Jira Live. So that way, the application is protected from getting published to the outside world. So any questions till here? Any questions on the ZTNA?
Vinay garu, one generic question. So even F5 also will provide zero trust access, right?
True.
So I mean, are we at what level when compared to this current trend in the industry is going back?
Well, there are a lot many things yet to be done. The ZTNA and the ZTNA that's currently in implementation in our Big IP is way below to the market. There are a lot many things that need to be done. As I told you, the ZTNA has, though it is not a platform, it is not just an offering as a feature. At various levels, you should be having enforcement points. We have a proxy. You need to build a proxy. You need to build a connector. You need to build a server side or the connectors or adapters for talking to the IDaaS or the enterprise directory. So you should be actually developing another connectors and adapters which talk to the other existing access management stuff. So ZTNA is a more of a model or an approach, more of an approach than a platform. So Big IP, to me, with ZDNA, the current ZDNA is still what do you call, in a very early stages. But our competitors like Netscaler or Zscaler or others, they are way beyond now. Um, they have totally removed the VPN from their use cases these days. So Zscaler, that's how it's been replaced in the recent one or two tenders. You would have seen that Zscaler has taken over because their use case is more of a ZTNA. Big IP has many more use cases, just not the ZTNA.
Yeah. So, I mean, with the combination of Volterra platform and plus Big IP SSL zero trust solution, I mean, can we implement the whole model?
No. You
Okay,
still need to
okay.
add additional features for the ZTNA.
Okay.
This is
I mean,
SSL.
do you mean to say at the APM level? I mean, as of now, we have a centralized policy control, so that should be
but
distributed
we don't
across.
have the flexibility to define a software defined policies for a firewall, for example.
Okay.
We don't have a policy. We don't have a policy editor, or we don't have a way or a mechanism to define a policy around user authorization. Or you don't have a policy to define the risk factors that are allowed, that are as part of the policy. You understood?
Yeah, but
risk
if you see,
yeah, go ahead.
to see in some extent, we have this per request based policies, right?
Yeah, we do have some extent, but it is not. Some of the use cases are the enterprises has got more and use cases for the ZTNA, and not only that, actually, ZTNA also requires you to modify the end user application also, how they consume the authorization token or authentication token generated at various endpoints or the server side. So application also need to make those changes. Right now, if application is consuming SAML tokens only, and ZTNA is enforcing a policy on a OAuth or OpenID Connect.
Right.
So of course the application cannot be a part of the system. So application also need to make some changes. There are crude ways of doing it. You can just put what you call web application server, Nginx server before to the application, and you don't have to make any changes in the application. You can just do the same form filling. It's one of the crude ways, but it is possible to do the same. People still do it.
Something like this integrated authentication helps us.
It does actually, but it becomes more complex. You should be seeing Zscaler ones.
Okay.
Sure. It is more focused only on the ZTNA. I mean, the whole of the Zscaler product. They don't do access management. It's not, you cannot configure that as a service provider, or you cannot configure that as an IDP. Whereas Big IP has more things to do than ZTNA. The focus was actually distributed across all the modules. We have started with the load balancer. From there, our journey began, and we have ended up with offering of ZTNA based solutions. So imagine the amount of focus that have been distributed across the modules.
I think it's a very big challenge to the pre-sales folks, right?
Yeah, true. But yeah, as I told you, there are many crude ways of doing it. Right. So they do it. They just put a Nginx server before to the web application, intercept all the traffic that goes to the application, and they modify according to the policies defined in the ZTNA, and modify the HTTP request and response. But the only problem, but again, the problem is in the portal access, you would have seen a lot of SRs inflow, because that way, putting a reverse proxy, it will break the URL rewriting at some point. You will fix those issues. Some other time you will face that suddenly a JavaScript library has been upgraded and all your rules again, I rules will break, and you will fixing those issues.
Yeah.
Rather, if you would
Currently,
have
we are in
made
that
those,
situation.
yeah, rather if you would have made those changes in the application itself, you would have never needed need of any I rules, right? The consumption would have happened directly by the application itself. I
That
think
itself
I
is a
answered
big
your question.
challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we check on the time. It's 3:43. There are only 5 slides. I'll quickly finish off. ZTNA is one thing that has been, as I told you, has been when it started. It started in 2010, a decade ago. Still, it is very new to many enterprises. The coin, then the word itself is not very popular. It's still in development in a lot of other phases. But there is another new concept called Secure Access Service Edge. It's called SACE. It is more advanced than ZTNA, but it is not a replacement to ZTNA, and ZTNA is only a part of SAS. So probably you will hear it in a year's time, or maybe a big IP will have Secure Access Service Edge as a feature or as an implementation point at some point in time in the future.
Probably
So,
our Walter acquisition is strategy towards that, right?
maybe I'm not sure. Probably I have not gone through that much.
Because I mean they have two offerings. One is the Walter as a platform, platform. The other is like the Secure Edge is also there.
Yeah,
probably it may be a preliminary level it is there. But yeah.
I never seen the offerings, but as you said, yeah, the Walter acquisition is. But had it been the true marriage, the ZTNA would have been on place with the Walter coming in. But the ZTNA is still the same phase. It is in the same place as I joined a year ago or a year and a half year ago.
Yeah, okay. Walter is very recent, I think.
Very recent, yeah.
6 months, yeah. Okay.
So this is a more of a cloud architecture. This is introduced by Gardner in 2019, and it has many other modules like CDN, CASB, software defined perimeters. All these things and concepts have been inculcated or induced into a platform, and through which it gives you a provision to define the policies and push these policies into different systems. So these policies are defined around identities, and once you have that identity and the policy in place, it can push it to a SaaS, it can push into a cloud, it can push it to a mobile, it can push that policy into a data center, it can push that policy into an enforcement agent or IoT edge. So all these things, mostly, I mean, not everything is covered by every SaaS platform, but through CDNA you will be able to define some, through RBAC you will be able to define some, through a network based software defined network you will be able to define some. So around the identity, now you would have seen from rule based and role based to a system where the policies are now defined around identities. So whether this user is allowed or denied. So if you have come to that point, you don't have to really analyze all the policies at runtime and come to a conclusion whether that URL should be allowed or denied. Rather, all these policies have been already resolved, and it is been defined that this particular user, this URL or this object is defined yes or no, allowed or denied. So you'll get to know that when you traverse the policies, and you'll simply go ahead, and it will be a straightforward stuff whether the user should be allowed or not. And yeah, SAS, as I told you, SAS is not against ZTNA. ZTNA is part of SAS, and think of SAS as a high level design or as a parent of ZTNA. They are not separate, they are not competing, rather ZTNA is part of the overall SASE architecture. So SASE combines software-defined WAN and other networking services and functions, including this and not limited to ZTNA, cloud access service brokers, firewalls, secure web gateways, and SaaS. Basically, it's around cloud. So at last, I wanted to tell you that all the security policies that you have seen or going through are now defined around the identities. Identity is much more important, and maybe it can be a customer to an enterprise or partners or employees to run the business agility, because across the application platforms within the enterprise, all the information resources with all the credentials, set of credentials the user has. They're all policies defined around the identity. It can be a physical access, it can be a logical access. Yeah, that's about the IAM. I've just gone a little bit beyond IAM. I wanted to talk more about ZTNA and SASE, but because of time, I'll see whether I can dedicate independent time slot for ZTNA. If you are all interested, we'll discuss at some other point. So I'll quickly go through or introduce you to a set of certifications in IAM. Only in IAM, there's a certification body called Identity Management Institute.org, which gives you following certifications: Certified Access Management Specialist, Certified Identity and Access Manager, Certified Identity Governance Expert, Certified Identity Management and Professional, Certified Identity and Security Technologist. So you can choose your focus area, and you can do the certification. It really helps your career and gives a lot of motivation, and also motivate others within the team to learn more from you. So that's all from my side. Any questions? Any questions? No, I take it as no. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for all the patience that you have. You have been listening to me for quite some time. Rakesh, can you stop the recording?
Yeah.